Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. Let's do it. Let's get to it. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. It is Friday, December 20th, 7 a.m. Eastern. I'm your host, Jon Jeune, at the real Jon Jeune _FF. And it is the Week 16 semifinals matchup show. So if you are playing in fantasy football matchups this week, that means you got one more week until you're playing for the big thing, the trophy, the chip, and love to see that, man. You love to see it. I got some leagues myself where playing for the right to go to a championship. So it just seems like every decision that we make is heightened, right? It's like do I play this guy? Do I play that guy? Do I start this defense? Do I start that defense? It's like every single one feels like it's heightened. But that's the thing. It just feels like it, right? It just feels like there's a little bit more pressure. It just feels like the decision is that much more important. But at the end of the day, it's the same game we've been playing all year, right? So whatever process it is that got you here, that's the same process you're going to follow, right? However you choose your streaming defenses, however you choose your streaming tight end, like if that's what got you here, why switch it up, right? Why let it fail you? Now, if the process wasn't working and you were results oriented, then that's a little bit different, right? But if the process is legit and you know that, hey, you understand that sometimes this process is gonna win, sometimes it's gonna lose, but it's gonna win more times than it loses, then just keep on doing that thing. No need to overthink it, right? Just because the stakes are a little bit higher doesn't mean that the decisions that you were making the process for the decision making needs to change, right? Now again, like I said, if the process didn't make any sense but the results yielded the result that you wanted, and that's the result you're going to follow. It's like, hey, I'm going to flip a coin because every time I flipped a coin, the result was the one that was a good one. That doesn't mean that the process was good. It just means you were getting the results you wanted, so you're going to keep flipping coins. Now, if you do that to make you feel comfortable, then by all means, go ahead. Anyway, just a little piece of advice. But anyway, it's the Week 16 matchup show, and as you know, it is, we're looking at guys, running backs, wide receivers outside that top 20, seeing which ones we should be playing. Quarterbacks, tight ends outside that top 10, which ones we should be playing. And on the flip side of that, same guy, within those same thresholds, which ones we should not be playing, or which one we need to, supplement our lineup to be able to get us the best possible chance to win our matchup that we can. So last week we gave out 22 picks. 22 picks. That's a lot of picks. We gave out 22 of them, though. We had 5 guys beat their ECR by 10 spots or more. We had another 3 of the 22 guys beat their ECR outright. We had 3 misses. We had 10 big misses. 10 big misses is guys that did not beat that actually failed to meet their ECR by 10 spots or more. We had 1 tie. It was not a great week for the the guys that were called out in the matchup show. We had 4 of the big misses left their game because of injury. Those were Sincere McCormick, Zach Ertz, Jalen Waddle, and Geno Smith all left their game due to injury. We had Jameis Winston was benched. He was playing terrible before the benching, but he was benched. And then we had Isaiah Davis didn't make much of an impact because Breece Hall unexpectedly returned to the lineup there. So we'll circle back with the big misses during the accountability section, but let's start with the big hits, um, or the big hits and then the hits. Justice Hill was called out on the matchup show last week. Was ranked as the running back 39, finished as the running back 10. Chika Okonkwo was the tight end 23, ranked as tight end 23 coming into the week, finished as the tight end 7. Stone Smart, ranked as the tight end 30, finished as the tight end 16. Brian Thomas, ranked as the wide receiver 25, finished as the wide receiver 4. Tim Patrick, ranked as the wide receiver 62, finished as the wide receiver 30. And then in terms of the hits, we had Anthony Richardson, ranked as the quarterback 18, finished as the quarterback 15. We had Rashad White, ranked as the running back 22, finished as the running back 16. Pat Fryermuth, ranked as the tight end 14, finished as the tight end 8. Now, in terms of the big misses, like we talked about, Sincere McCormick left his game with an injury. Looked like he was going to be on his way to a nice day prior to the injury. But it's unfortunate it happens. Zach Ertz left his game with a concussion. Oh, sorry. McCormick was ranked as the running back 25, finished at 44. Ertz was ranked as the tight end 11, finished at 28, left with a concussion. Jalen Waddle, ranked as a wide receiver 31, finished as tied for the wide receiver 116 as he left with an injury, scored 0 fantasy points. Geno Smith was the quarterback 23, finished as the quarterback 29 as he left with a knee injury. However, he was a miss, not a big miss, so I jumped the gun a little bit there. Jake Ferguson, no injury, but ranked as the tight end 15, finished as the tight end 31 on a day where Cooper Rush threw 3 touchdown passes. Grant Calcaterra finishes the tight end 22 after being ranked, or finishes the tight end 39 after being ranked 22. Calvin Ridley finishes the wide receiver 43 after being ranked the wide receiver 23. Jacoby Myers finishes the wide receiver 36 after being ranked as the wide receiver 24. Ray McLeod finishes the wide receiver 93 after finishing as the wide receiver 52. And then in terms of the misses, Ramondre Stevenson ranked as the running back 21, finishes the running back 29. Adam Thielen ranked as the wide receiver 30, finishes the wide receiver 38. We talked about Geno Smith already. And then DJ Moore, who was also a start of the week, actually finished as the wide receiver 26 after being ranked as the wide receiver 26. So got a few, I don't know exactly how many recommendations we got this week, but we'll go through them as we always do. We got a couple from almost a couple from every game here, so quite a few recommendations to give out today. But yeah, let's just get this thing started. We got Saturday football. The Houston Texans against the Kansas City Chiefs. Let's go with Houston tight end Dalton Schultz. Now, it's hard to trust this Houston passing attack outside of Nico Collins right now. Schultz, who's ranked as the tight end 16 in expert consensus rankings, is in a decent spot here, having finished as the tight end 14 or better in 3 of his last 5 games. And this week's up against the Kansas City defense, allowing at least 7.9 PPR points to opposing tight ends in 4 of their last 5 games. And staying with the tight end position, let's talk about Kansas City tight end Noah Gray, who is the ECR PPR tight end 22. He's been the tight end 12 or better in 3 of his last 5 games, seeing at least 5 targets in all but 1 game where he saw 4 targets during that span. So he's very much involved in the offense, as we've been talking about for weeks now. And he's up against the Houston defense, allowing the 7th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games, allowing at least 11 PPR points to each of the opposing tight ends that they've played. So obviously we know Noah Gray, he's involved in this offense. He has a role behind or alongside Travis Kelce. I should say we do know Travis Kelce is the lead tight end, but Noah Gray plays enough snaps in the offense that he's finds his way to be involved in this passing attack. Moving on to the next game, we've got Saturday football again. the Pittsburgh Steelers against the Baltimore Ravens. And let's talk about Baltimore wide receiver Zay Flowers. He's ranked as the ECR PPR wide receiver 22. It's been a pretty down streak for Zay Flowers. He hasn't finished as a wide receiver 2 or better since week 9 against Denver. He still leads this team in targets by a pretty wide margin, averaging more than 2 targets per game than the next player. It just hasn't been leading to fantasy production. Well, this matchup should hopefully help, as over the last 3 weeks, Pittsburgh is allowing the second most PPR points to the wide receiver position. This is a matter of let's follow the targets. Let's follow the targets that are going to a talented player, and let's see if that yields the production that we're looking for. And I do want to highlight, I think, that Cincinnati game against that the Baltimore Ravens played against they played against Cincinnati back in week 9. Feel like Zay Flowers had suffered some sort of an ankle sprain coming out of that injury, coming out of that game. It seemed like he would be it seemed like he probably would have. I mean, it looked like at the time, like it was like um, looked like it could have been a high ankle sprain. Now he obviously practiced. He's been playing. He actually returned to that game. He's been playing in the game. It's just kind of it just seems as though maybe that's limiting him in some way, or that limited him. But he's several weeks removed from that injury, so I think maybe it's possible that the more weeks that pass by, the healthier he will become with that. Again, purely speculation on my part. He hasn't been on the injury report. At least he's not on the injury report this week. I wish I could see if he's been on the injury report in previous weeks. But anyway, that's just a little spiel that I'm going off on. Now, let's talk about this next game between Cleveland and Cincinnati. And I'm going to break a rule here. Cleveland running back Jerome Ford, ECR PPR running back 20. And the rule I'm breaking is I'm going with Jerome Ford. And what I mean by that is it was tough for me to choose from this game. And Jerome Ford is sitting here at the RB20, which technically means I shouldn't be able to talk about him in a positive light, right? If I talk about him because he's inside that top 20, I should be saying that you shouldn't play him. But that's not what I'm saying here. I think the RB20 is still too low for Jerome Ford, if we're being honest. And I get why he might be ranked that way, right? The Browns are 7.5-point dogs. Dorian Thompson-Robinson starting at quarterback, which could deflate the entire offensive environment. But the matchup here for Jerome Ford is a good one, as the Bengals have allowed the most fantasy points to opposing running backs over their last 3 games. And Ford should be the lead guy in this backfield, while also not having a chance to get game scripted out of this game. Right? He's going to play in passing downs, running downs, a close game, a blowout. Jerome Ford is going to be on this field, and he's going to see those opportunities. So now again, does DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson starting, kind of impact this offensive environment? I think so, for sure. But when we're looking for some running back production, for a guy that can be in, finishes an RB2 potentially, I think Jerome Ford brings that. Also, again, he's involved in the passing game. He's got some home run ability as well. And when they get down near the goal line, he's going to be, the main benefactor, and from a rushing perspective. Now let's move on to the next game. Let's talk about the Arizona Cardinals versus the Carolina Panthers. And let's talk about Carolina wide receiver Adam Thielen. He's the ECR PPR wide receiver 33. It wasn't a great week for Thielen last week, as he finished as the wide receiver 38 against Dallas. He did still happen to see 7 targets in the game, which did lead the team. Things just didn't go his way, which tends to happen sometimes, especially for wide receivers. But Thielen should continue to thrive given the volume he sees on a week-to-week basis. Staying in this game, staying at the wide receiver position, let's talk about Arizona wide receiver Marvin Harrison Jr., who's ranked as the ECR PPR wide receiver 30. It's been a rough rookie season for Harrison, but he's seen no less than 5 targets since week 7, while seeing no less than 6 targets since week 12. While he's still second in line to Trey McBride, those are still healthy target numbers. And now he's stepping into a matchup against the Carolina defense, allowing the 10th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. Just to be clear, I would play Thielen over Harrison Jr. in this game, just because I want the guy in the driver's seat for targets and on his offense. However, Harrison does have the better matchup, so there is that. But I would probably lean Thielen there. Um, Moving on to the next game, let's talk about Philadelphia Eagles against the Washington Commanders. And let's talk about Philadelphia tight end Grant Calcaterra, ECR PPR tight end 24. So, okay, when we talked about Calcaterra earlier in the week, it was through the lens that AJ Brown might either be unavailable or limited in this game against Washington, but that doesn't seem to be the case. However, we talked about this matchup, which is still true, as Washington has allowed the 12th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. And again, I'm talking to the people that are streaming tight ends, that have been streaming tight ends all season. Um, you know, I've been streaming tight ends in a lot of my leagues. I landed on K. Dotton. K. Dotton has hit a string of bad matchups. He's also been injured as well. In other leagues, I landed on Will Dissly. Will Dissly ended up with a shoulder injury. Stone Smart looked like he would have been a solid play yesterday, which I did play. I hedged my bet a little bit. I played him in a tight end premium league, but I didn't play him in a standard PPR league. So I'm probably going to land on a guy we'll talk about in a little bit later, just because of availability. It seems like almost either everybody's streaming tight ends or everybody's blocking people who are streaming tight ends. So Brenton Strange would probably be my top streaming option this week if I could get him, but there was no league where I was able to get a Brenton Strange. So yeah, actually that's not true. I picked him up in a league to block my opponent who probably needs a tight end. Or who definitely needs a tight end. And we'll talk about the guy that they ended up going with in a little bit. But Brenton Strange would be my top priority there at the tight end position if I'm streaming. But Grant Calcaterra I think he's a very nice, safe floor option for you if you just want a guy that's not going to get you 0 points. Now the question would be like, do you go Kyle Pitts or Grant Calcaterra? And last week I went Grant Calcaterra, which I think that worked out by like 3 points or something. I think this week I would probably lean Kyle Pitts. I think I want to lean into that unknown. Speaking of Atlanta and Kyle Pitts, we're not going to talk about Kyle Pitts, but we're going to talk about his quarterback. Atlanta Falcons against the New York Giants. Let's talk about Atlanta quarterback Michael Penix Jr. ECR quarterback 27. All right, so how crazy would it be to trust your right to go to a fantasy championship on the left arm of a rookie quarterback that you've never seen play in any extended action in the regular season, let alone any extended action really in the preseason either? But this is a rookie with first-round draft capital, playing in a good offensive situation, right? He's got good weapons around him. That's known for being almost like a point guard at the position, right? Being able to distribute the football different areas of the field, especially down the field. He's able to distribute the football, which is something that this offense has been missing a little bit. But aside all that, this quarterback also has the athleticism to take off and boogie when the play breaks down using 4.4 speed. And that's all before we get to the fact that he's playing in a matchup against a team in the New York Giants that is allowing the 8th most fantasy points to the quarterback position over their last 3 games. Now, again, I get what it would take for you to go to Michael Penix, and I totally understand that. It might be tough for you to stomach that because sometimes there's this unknown, but I am intrigued by the unknown sometimes. That doesn't mean that you guys need to trust what I'm saying, but what I am saying is that Michael Penix Jr. is a talented rookie. He is by all accounts has learned this offense. And according to those in the Falcons, he's got the athleticism. His rushing numbers don't look great in college. He suffered some knee injuries, which I think it limited him from wanting to run at times. But when we saw the athleticism, at the combine, him running, running that 4.4, I think that, really just reminded folks that, hey, this kid's an athlete. And then again, the ability to throw the deep ball as well, something I think folks are obviously very aware of. He was highly graded in my quarterback prospect model. So, you guys know how, if you listen to me in the off season talking dynasty, you guys know how much I value that as well, right? Uh, Bo Nix was very highly rated in that model. Look how he's done through his rookie year. Jaden Daniels also very highly rated in that model. Not to say it's perfect, but Caleb Williams, both those guys were ranked ahead of Caleb Williams in the model. Um, Drake May also, decently highly rated when you look respective to previous years. And Michael Penix Jr. He was also, very highly rated when you look to, relative to previous years as well. So Michael Penix Jr. is a guy for me that I will be leaning on in some fantasy championships, right? And you're going to ask myself, oh, well, John, what situations would those be, right? Again, if you've been streaming quarterback all year, if there's a guy on this list that we're going to talk about who I'm going to tell you I don't want to play him. I don't want to play him this week, right? So, all that being said, MPJ is definitely on my radar this week. Staying in this game, and I just want a public service announcement. This is 2 quarterback deep leagues only. That's it. 2 quarterback and deep leagues only with this play. But New York Giants quarterback Drew Lock. ECR PPR quarterback 32. Yes, there's only 32 teams in the league, and according to experts, he is the last quarterback you should consider. But I differ a little bit on that. Okay, so this one's a little crazier than the last one, but Drew Lock has some effort in his system similar to the way that Jameis does. He also has run for at least 57 yards in each of his last 2 starts, and is going up against an Atlanta defense allowing the 11th most fantasy points to the position over their last 3 games. Again, 2 quarterbacks, deep leagues only for Drew Lock. That's it. Staying in this game, I know we're a third person from this game. Atlanta running back Tyler Algier, ECR PPR running back 36. Now let's lean into the idea that the Falcons, as 8.5-point favorites, blow the doors off of the New York Giants. Well, if that's the case, I would expect to see Algier get involved. He's seen no less than 8 rush attempts across his last 3 games, and that number actually has trended up each of the last 3 games, going from 8 to 9 to 12 just last week. And he's actually seen double-digit opportunities each of the last 2 weeks. So if that happens this week against a New York Giants defense, allowing the 12th most fantasy points to the position over their last 3 games, I think RB3 or an RB2 type finish is well within the range of outcomes. Now, I didn't put this player down, but as you look at the injury news with Tyrone Tracy Jr., I think that Devin Singletary should be in consideration for a spot start this week, right? If you need a flex play potentially, or you need help at running back, Devin Singletary makes some sense as getting some volume. Now, the matchup, not particularly great, but Devin Singletary, what we know about him is that he will be involved as a pass catcher, and he's also going to get some opportunities at the goal line as well. So from that perspective, I think Devin Singletary makes some sense there. If you are the Tyrone Tracy manager and Tyrone Tracy's, does not play in this game, then Singletary definitely makes sense as an option there for you. Now, moving on to the next game, let's talk about the Tennessee Titans against the Indianapolis Colts. And let's talk about Tennessee running back Tajay Spears he's the ECR PPR running back 33. So Tony Pollard has missed 2 straight practices now. I mean, it could possibly be 3 from the time that I wrote these notes, but let me just confirm that. But anyway, Tony Pollard is dealing with an ankle injury, and he has missed, 2 straight practices, Wednesday and Thursday. That's interesting. He's missed 2 straight practices with this ankle injury, and now we have seen Pollard miss a whole week of practice and yet see a full allotment of work. When that happened, Spears wasn't available. And Spears now is available and is coming off a 27 PPR point outing in his last game. A good amount of that was in the passing game, and we attributed that to Mason Rudolph stepping in as the starting filling in as the quarterback there for Will Levis. And now would you look at that? Mason Rudolph is starting this week in place of Will Levis. So Spears is in play, whether Pollard is playing or not. We talked about him on the waiver show, but I think he definitely needs to be in consideration. Another guy we talked about in relation to what happens with the quarterback situation was Chig Okonkwo. He's the ECR PPR tight end 20. And we talked about him last week in both the waiver show, in which he came through for us with a tight end 7 finish. And we talked about him, I said the matchup show, I guess that's what I meant to say, where we talked about him and he came through with a tight end 7 finish, but also talked about him in the waiver show. And we talked about him potentially being an option this week, depending on Mason Rudolph, if he steps in as a starter. And with the matchup here against Indianapolis, allowing the second most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games and the second most touchdowns to the position on the season, I think Chig Okonkwo is in a nice spot here that we can go ahead and start him. And that's the guy that I was talking about earlier, where, I probably would go him over Calcaterra. That's the guy that my opponent's actually going to go with when I try to block them from Brenton Strange. But, we talked about Chig last week. It's not for the faint of heart. He could end up with single-digit points. He could end up with double-digit points. The thing that I was not anticipating last week, which we saw from Chig, was the 10 targets. And the 10 targets was a really nice number there for Chig. So if he's going to continue to do that, then yeah, by all means, let's sign me up. Sign me up for sure. Let's talk about this next game here between the Detroit Lions and the Chicago Bears, and let's talk about running back for the Lions, or for the Lions. He does not play for the Lions. He used to play for the Lions, but he plays for Chicago now. And of course, I'm talking about DeAndre Swift. Chicago running back DeAndre Swift he's the ECR PPR running back 25. In the last 2 weeks, the Lions have been getting beat up by opposing running backs, and they've given up 6 touchdowns to opposing running backs during that span. Swift has been up and down this season, and most recently down, having not finished inside the top 24 in any of his last 3 games. He's still continuing to see decent volume with 14, 16, and 20 opportunities over his last 3 games. As long as he continues to see that volume, I expect him to make the most of these opportunities against a bruised and battered Lions defense. And of course, there's also the revenge game narrative that you can play into as well. Let's move on to this next game between the LA Rams and the New York Jets. Now let's talk about New York Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers, as he's the ECR quarterback 16. Rodgers has been on a bit of a heater the last couple weeks with back-to-back QB1 finishes. The Rams defense is playing better than they were to start the year, and the Josh Allen explosion the last 2 weeks ago kind of skews things for how they look defensively a little bit. But I think Rodgers continues his stretch of good play at home against this Rams team, and he's getting into a kind of a little bit of a groove here with Devontae Adams. So I think that obviously also helps as well. Now, let's move on to the next guy in this game, also on the opposite side of this game. LA Rams quarterback Matthew Stafford. Stafford's been playing pretty well himself with 3 QB1 finishes over his last 5 games. Since week 11, he's thrown 10 touchdown passes to 0 interceptions. Those 10 touchdowns are tied for fifth amongst quarterbacks during that span. And he gets a New York Jets defense that's allowed 18.6 fantasy points in 4 of their last 5 games to opposing quarterbacks. And 3 of those games were for over 23 and a half fantasy points. So Matthew Stafford definitely in play here as at the quarterback position for sure. Now, moving on to this next matchup, we've got the Minnesota Vikings against the Seattle Seahawks. And let's talk about Minnesota wide receiver Jordan Addison. He's the ECR wide receiver 26. Addison has seen at least 6 targets in each of his last 5 games. He has top 3 finishes, and he has 2 top 3 finishes in 2 of his last 4 games. And while Seattle isn't necessarily a great matchup for opposing wide receivers, I want to chase the volume here with Addison, who's 29% target share the last 3 weeks, is second only to teammate Justin Jefferson. And now we often talk about that, 30% target share against a defense that is strong against wide receivers. Well, Addison's, really pushing that 30% target share over the last 3 weeks, just at 29%. And with Justin Jefferson being the primary target, he'll also be the primary focus for the opposing defense as well. So I think Addison could see enough targets to offset what looks like on paper a tough matchup here for opposing wide receivers. Moving on to this next game, let's talk about the New England Patriots against the Buffalo Bills, and let's talk about New England quarterback Drake May, as he's the ECR quarterback 19. May has back-to-back QB1 finishes, getting it done both through the air and on the ground, with at least 59 rushing yards or a rushing touchdown in those last 2 games. And being a 14.5-point dog on the road doesn't sound like it bodes well for a rookie quarterback, but the Bills have been terrible defensively the last 2 weeks, allowing more than 800 passing yards and 7 passing touchdowns. This is a nice spot here for Drake May as he faces the quarterback he likes to model his game after in Josh Allen. Staying in this game, let's talk about Buffalo tight end Dalton Kincaid. He's the ECR PPR tight end 14, and Kincaid in his first game back from injury saw 7 targets, which he converted to 4 receptions for 53 yards. And now he's getting a New England defense that's allowed the 3rd most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. So definitely like Kincaid here. Moving on to the next game, let's talk about San Francisco 49ers against the Miami Dolphins, and let's talk San Fran quarterback Brock Purdy. Now, I've given out a decent amount of quarterback recommendations today, and almost all of these guys, and I say almost all these guys because the only one I probably wouldn't consider would be Drew Lock. I would play all of them ahead of Purdy. And how many did I give out, actually? It was only really 2, right? I gave out 3, but we're only really talking about... Oh, no, it's not true. I gave out Stafford and Rodgers as well, right? So Stafford, Rodgers, Drake May, and Michael Penix Jr. are all guys who I would play ahead of Purdy, who's ranked as the quarterback 10 according to expert consensus rankings. The Dolphins have allowed the 18th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. So that's just okay. But Purdy has been a QB1 in 1 of his last 3 games, but finished outside of QB2 territory in the other 2 games. I get it. Kyle Shanahan, he's got, George Kittle with him. Deebo Samuel, Javon Jennings is a good player. But I just can't trust Brock Purdy this week. I'd rather go to these other options, like an Aaron Rodgers, like a Matthew Stafford, who both have been playing better in recent weeks, but also have better matchups on their end. And then Michael Penix Jr. has a really good matchup against the Giants, and Drake May in a good spot as well, and also is going to use his legs. So, definitely you're able to trust that floor that Drake May is going to give you as well. Also in this game, didn't plan to talk about him, but Isaac Guerrero is doubtful to play with a hamstring injury. And so Patrick Taylor Jr. is stepping in as the starting running back here for the 49ers. And so he's potentially in line to play here. If you are looking for help at the running back position or need help at need a flex this week. All right, let's move on to the next game here. We got the Jacksonville Jags against the Las Vegas Raiders. And let's talk about Las Vegas wide receiver Jacoby Myers. He's the ECR PPR wide receiver 23. Now, Jacoby Myers failed to come through for us last week, but he was dealing with Desmond Ridder, which I thought he could overcome purely because of the matchup. That turned out to be incorrect. And while this week he gets the matchup, but he also gets Aiden O'Connell back. So I think we can trust him in this matchup here against the Jacksonville Jags, who, we've definitely been attacking all year, but gave up almost 200 yards in a quarter and a half to Devontae Adams last week. So, all right, let's move on to this next game. We've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the Dallas Cowboys. And let's talk about Tampa Bay wide receiver Jalen McMillan. He's the ECR PPR wide receiver 43. And this one doesn't make any sense to me at all. He's finished as the wide receiver 9 and the wide receiver 18 the last 2 weeks, respectively, and is now set to face off against the Dallas defense, allowing the 8th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. And with 13 targets for 9 catches, 134 yards, and 3 touchdowns over his last 2 games, he's definitely earned Baker's trust. So let's not overthink this one too much this week. Now, moving on to Monday Night Football, final game of the week. Let's talk about the New Orleans Saints against the Green Bay Packers. And let's talk about Green Bay wide receiver Romeo Doubs. He's ranked as the ECR PPR wide receiver 41. And he's now set to face off against a New Orleans defense, allowing the 11th most PPR points to the position after his returning from his first game back after suffering a concussion and finishing as a wide receiver 1, catching 2 touchdown passes. So Doubs definitely, there's something different about him versus these other Green Bay wide receivers, right? He's not like as flashy as them. Jaden Reed, does all the cool stuff after the catch. He's used as, in the running game. And then Christian Watson and Dontavian Wicks, they're both these, long vertical threats that can make plays down the field. And so from that perspective, I'm looking at Doubs, who doesn't really have any of that, but just the way he uses his body control to catch the football, uses his big body to box out defenders. I think Jordan Love is somewhat attracted to throwing a ball to that type of receiver there. So Doubs definitely in play here as a wide receiver 3 with some wide receiver 2 upside. Now let's get into the week 16 starts of the week. Last week it was an okay week, I would say. Anthony Richardson finished as the quarterback 15. Rico Dowdle finished as the running back 13. DJ Moore, the wide receiver 26. TJ Hawkinson finished as the tight end 10. So nobody really blew it out of the water. But let's see if we can get some big time performances this week. Starting with the quarterback position, let's talk about Tampa Bay quarterback Baker Mayfield going up against Dallas. Baker's finished, he's been basically a fantasy star all season, ranking as a quarterback 5 in total fantasy points and fantasy points per game. He's only finished outside the top 9 4 times this year, and this week he faces the Dallas defense, allowing the 9th most fantasy points to the quarterback position over their last 3 weeks. Let's trust Baker to deliver another top 5 performance this week and carry you to the finals as he goes back home to Texas. Now, let's talk about the Arizona running back James Conner going up against Carolina for my running back start of the week. Conner's definitely on fire right now, coming off an RB1 and RB7 finish in his last 2 games. With Amari DeMarcado out and Trey Benson potentially sidelined, Conner could dominate touches in the Arizona backfield this week against the Carolina defense, giving up the 7th most PPR points to the running back position over their last 3 games. He's set for another big game this week, so start him with increased confidence this week. Moving on to my wide receiver start of the week, we're going to go with a game stack here, team stack, game stack, whatever you want to call it, and give this rookie a little bump here. But let's talk about Jalen McMillan against Dallas. McMillan has been a rising star finishing as the wide receiver 9 and 18 over his last 2 weeks. Over that span, he's racked up 13 targets for 9 catches, 134 yards, and 3 touchdowns, and is facing a Dallas defense allowing the 8th most PPR points to wide receivers over their last 3 games. McMillan is a must start this week. Let the rookie lead you to the fantasy finals. And last but not least, the tight end start of the week. Let's talk about Detroit tight end Sam Laporta. After a slow start, Laporta has turned it around with 3 consecutive tight end 1 finishes. He's stepping up at the right time, and with David Montgomery sidelined, the Lions could lean more on the passing attack. Laporta is a key part of the offense and a great option this week against the Chicago defense, allowing the 5th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. All right, y'all. That is all I have for the matchup show. That's all I have for the fantasy football starts of the week for week 16. Make sure you are tapped in to the Fantasy Football Diagnostics podcast, whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitch, X, Instagram, Spotify. Make sure you if you're listening to the podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Play, wherever you get your podcast, make sure you are subscribed. Make sure you're commenting, you're liking. Make sure you rate and review the show as well. All of those things don't cost you anything, but they go a long way to help the show out. So we greatly appreciate that. Specifically, if you are enjoying the content, and if this week, I know I said last week I would be mostly unavailable to answer questions or anything like that. But if you have questions this week, whether you want to DM them or whether you want to leave a comment or you just want to tweet at me on X or leave a comment under an Instagram post, whatever it is that your main method of communication is, definitely feel free to reach out to me there as well. That being said, Gal, have a good one. Good luck this week. Hopefully you make it to your fantasy finals. Praying that you all do, unless you're playing me, of course. But next week, Tuesday, we'll be back talking waivers for week 17. It's beautiful, beautiful thing that we've made it this far. For those of you that play in the archaic system of a week 18 finals, don't worry. I'll have you covered then too. But please stop playing week 18. Anyway, guys, see you next week, and good luck this week. Peace.